Tonight we're not starting off with a necessarily a really positive story, in the sense that we read about the death of Sarah tonight. It's Torah portion. We're actually beginning where the Torah portion begins. Chapter 23 of Genesis is Chaye Sarah, but what we call the life of Sarah, not her death, but the life of Sarah. And we're actually beginning what would be a Torah portion that we ended up we read about 2 months ago. But I want to give people at least the knowledge that even though we begin with a funeral, we end up we're also going to read about a wedding. So it's only 2 chapters that we're going to read today. One of them is actually a super long chapter, a really, really long chapter, the longest chapter in Genesis, chapter 24. But we really do have kind of in the last couple of weeks, we've really run the gamut of the life cycle. We had Isaac's birth, and then we had his bris and birth in the same time. But we read last week in chapter 22 the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which I wouldn't say it's his bar mitzvah, but it's definitely his coming of age. It's something. And we don't have bar mitzvahs mentioned in the Torah. It's not until the rabbinic period that we find discussions about, a bar mitzvah type ceremony, a celebration or recognition of a child entering into that next stage of their life. That's mentioned in the Talmud, and it's actually mentioned even to some extent. One of the earliest references to it in a weird way is a very brief mention of Jesus's bar mitzvah in the book of Luke. It mentions that at 12, and again, it's either Luke making a mistake or Jesus was just an advanced student. He has his bar mitzvah in Jerusalem, if you will. But it is mentioned there. So there's some kind of recognition that at least by 2,000 years ago, we had bar mitzvahs, but we don't have them in the Torah. We have the closest thing maybe to Isaac's bar mitzvah in the Akedah. And then and I definitely have talked to bar and bat mitzvah kids who feel like they're on the altar about to be sacrificed at their bar and bat mitzvahs. We've had some kids who've had, and one of them, unfortunately, was last year. We had a panic attack during a bar mitzvah, which was the worst one that I've ever had. We had one kid that threw up once during his bar mitzvah.
I had one that fainted.
I haven't had fainting. That's pretty bad too. I had a wedding.
Yeah, he passed out right before the end. It was pretty intense.
No, this was a young man who actually threw up as he was carrying around the Torah. He didn't throw up on the Torah, but it was pretty memorable. And he did a great job. And
wow.
He ended up recovering really well. But as he was marching around with the Torah before he read from the Torah, I think the excitement and the nerves got to him. And I was like, oh my gosh, that didn't just happen. And it did. And I did. I'm like, yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
So I thought Isaac was like in his 30s.
Well, no, Don. We don't know. You're absolutely right. We don't know how old he is. The oldest he can be is 37, based on the fact that we read this week about his mother dying when she's 127, and that she was 90 when he was born, right? So if you do the math, that's 37 years. So that's the most, well, technically speaking, it doesn't have to be written chronologically anyways.
Right.
Sarah could have been dead by the time, so he could have even been older.
Yeah.
But usually the limit is 37. We talked about it last week. We don't know how old Isaac is. We don't know how long there was a lapse between the previous story, which is about his birth, and how Hagar and Ishmael get.
But we do know that he's not a baby because he actually walked up.
Correct. And he's carrying the wood, and
Right.
he's big enough to carry the wood, and he's old enough. He's of a level that he's able to discuss the situation with his father, right? To ask, where's I see the wood, I see the kindling, the flint rock. Where's the offering? So he's old enough to reason that. But yeah, we don't know how old he is. The last thing we read about was actually the birth of Rebekah. So we read about Rebekah being born. And then the next thing we read about is Chaye Sarah. and it says that she is 127. It says Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life came to 127 years. And it says that Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. So we know that Hebron will become the burial place for the Jewish people in Kiryat Arba, in the cave of Machpelah, this place that we read about now. And I want to tell you that the reason that she's buried there, and the reason why we have the cave of Machpelah there to some extent, is because she died there. So again, they could have traveled and they could have buried her anywhere. I guess you can make the argument. I mean, they travel with Jacob's body at the very end of Genesis. They travel all the way from Egypt back up to be in this same spot. But for various reasons, and some people say it was just kind of where it was meant to be, that Hebron becomes the burial spot. But at least the way the Torah presents it, that's where she was living when she died. But if you notice, the way the Torah presents her death is significant, and many people have talked about it before. And the fact that it doesn't say that Sarah died when she was 127. It says that Sarah lived to be 127. And what the kind of the takeaway from this is that it's really important the way we think about people's lives, the way we put them into perspective, in life, obviously, but also in death. And that when we eulogize somebody, when we talk about somebody after they've gone, we have the ability for us to talk about them. And the reality is that they can't respond, right? So to some extent, it's even more incumbent on us to be really careful of how we talk about people when they pass, and that we really have the ability to choose how we're going to remember people. And that means, to some extent, remembering what pieces of their lives, what aspects of their lives we want to remember, right? And we have that ability. And we, of course, can remember the bad things that people did, or the bad moments that we had with them, or we can remember the good moments we have with them. But at a basic level, when we start framing someone's life, we can think about what they did in life, not how they died. And again, sometimes, as we know today, especially, medicine has not made death easier. In some ways, it's made it more difficult for so many people. Their deaths are not anywhere with the level of dignity that they might have been otherwise because of our technology, medical technology. And again, I'm not making a judgment that we shouldn't have medicine. I'm just saying that it's sometimes horrific. Having someone literally have to be unplugged is not. I don't think we're at the point yet. I hope we're not at the point yet of where we hopefully will be one day when it comes to being able to let people go from this world. So it's very hard. And again, Sarah's on the line now. Sarah, deals with hospice and with the end of life all the time. This is we don't have a lot of information about how she died. The fact that she died before her husband, who was older than her, is obviously somewhat, she has a very long life. So we can't say that she, didn't live a long life. She lived 7 years beyond what people are supposed to live. Remember, the Bible says you're supposed to be 120, but Abraham here already is 10 years older than her, and he's going to live a little bit more time. Actually, one of the weird things that we're going to read about in the Torah, he actually gets married again and has more babies during this last period of his life. But just consider for 1 second the fact that when you say someone died at 85 or whatever, or 100 and whatever it is, instead of you say the person lived to be 100, think about how different those words are. Just the simple way of saying the person died or the person lived. And I think it's so amazing, because they could have said she died. The next line says she died. It's not like it doesn't have, it's not like we don't have words for it in Hebrew. So there was a conscious decision to introduce her end of life by focusing on the way she lived and the fact that she lived rather than the fact that she died. And that's a really significant lesson that we take away from this. This Torah portion is our first introduction into the life cycle stage of death. I mean, we've read about bris, we've read about Brit Milah just recently, actually, in the Torah, but now we've come to this cycle. We haven't really read about marriage, though we're about to in this same portion. Just in the next chapter, we're going to read about marriage a little bit. And we don't know exactly what happened in the ancient world when it came to death, and specifically for our people. But what we do know is that we focus on the way someone lived, and we focus on the righteous aspects of their life as much as possible. And it's an overriding and when I eulogize someone and when I help families conduct a memorial service, I really ask them to focus on the positive and to not use this as a time to air during this funeral service, to air the dirty laundry and to drudge up the negative. And I believe that, I mean, that's traditional Judaism on that. And I believe the Torah starts off that by telling us to focus on her life, and the Torah focuses on that. And so that to me is a Jewish value. I will tell you that in traditional Judaism, you're actually not meant to over eulogize somebody. It's considered to be, to some extent, not that you should say anything bad about them, but you also have to worry about over eulogizing people. And oftentimes in traditional Judaism, there isn't the same emphasis on eulogy, what we call hesped, as there is in the non-Orthodox world. So it's considered to be kind of like, in a normal situation, not having a lot of people speak. And I've been to some traditional funerals where they still kind of follow this, where the traditional, more traditional rabbi will really discourage people from eulogizing somebody unless, the community recognizes them as a tzaddik, as a real righteous person. So it's very strange. We don't have eulogies mentioned in the Bible in that way, but what we do see is we see real emotion, because it says Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her, to cry over her. Bewail is a fancy way of saying it, but the words leave kota means he cried for her, he wailed for her, and a deep cry for her. And that the mourning really happens from the heart, and it's not an intellectual response. It doesn't say he eulogized her. It says that he mourned for her and he cried for her. So you can see, what is the response? The response is to be emotionally honest and open about it. And that's a really interesting thing too, is that the Bible recognizes that whatever the rituals are that we do, whatever the accoutrement of the funeral celebration of life, the beautiful spread that we have at the Shiva, I don't know, let's assume that they had a good spread for her. But guess what? The most important thing is that her husband mourned her and he cried for her. Mm-hmm. And that's the first Jew. He's the example that, again, sets for the rest of us, mm-hmm. is his emotion. And then it says, then Abraham rose from beside his dead and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you, that I may remove my dead for burial. Which doesn't sound like a very, it's more of a formal way of saying I need a burial spot. But in the whole discussion we're going to have now is, and most of this Torah portion is a negotiation over the burial plot. It's not about what they did for her. It's not about what they said about her. It's not about any of those things that we wish there would have been. It's a negotiation for the next 10 verses between him and the Hittites over Canaanites Hittites, I mean, it's the same, it's interchangeable here, over the burial plot. So it's not exactly what we would like to have had, but it is interesting. And again, why I'm pointing this out is that he does get to the business of burying the person that he cares about. He has to, right? And he has to do that. But his first reaction is not, yeah, I've got to call the cemetery. I've got to bury her and then I'll cry. He cries for her first.
Mhm.
He mourns for her first, and then he gets to the business. And it doesn't say that a week passed. It doesn't say anything weird like that. It doesn't say that he will not let go of the body, which happens sometimes, by the way, where people cannot emotionally allow them. They don't even know how to have the mortuary staff come into the room. Doesn't say that, but does say he mourns for her before he makes the call, if you will. Yeah. Please. Someone was going to say something.
I said, it's hard. It's very hard.
Yeah. Do you want to finish up what you, I know what you mean, but do you want to tell people what you meant by that?
Well, it brings, when you're with somebody who is dying, you are with them and with them and with them. And then there is an ending to being with them. And the person that you care about is taken away. It is very, very hard. You have to steel yourself for being able to let go because you want to hang on.
Yeah.
At least I did.
Yeah. No, I think that's a normal reaction, because the moment that person is gone from your vision, from your care, there's another level of finality to it, but there's this there's a moment where you realize that there's nothing more you can do for the person.
Yeah.
Because until the last minute, if you really have been in that situation, you know that you want to do, you'll do anything you can for the person, but when it happens, there's just nothing more you can do. And it's not, I don't want to say it's a feeling of failure, but it's a realization that there's nothing more you can do.
There's a helplessness. You can't, there's nothing you can do to help.
Yeah. And up until that moment, look, we trust doctors to take care of the people we love, the nurses, the hospitals, and we know that, we can't, do the medical stuff that these people are doing, but we are kind of responsible for it. We're the ones who are coming there. Oftentimes we'll go to the hospital, we'll check in on them, we'll talk to the doctors, see what's going on. And so even though we're not in charge of the medical care, we still feel like we're responsible, or still feel like we're monitoring, there's something we can do. And there's a very weird thing that happens in our world today, because we have professional mortuary people. Most of us don't know what happens from that point on. And so, and I've, I believe me, I've had a lot of funerals. I've done, I've dealt with stuff with my own family, but very few times have I actually gone with the mortuary and been there after that step of the person being placed into the hearse. So very rarely, and I've been in a lot of cemeteries and mortuaries and gone into the back, going through the back, but there really is a sense and even for me, of a sense of like kind of the unknown of what really happens. And so in the old days, people would be buried almost immediately. They would literally leave the house. They would take the body from the house and bury the person. There was no intermediary step of a day or two or even longer where a person wouldn't be in your care. And so now there's this feeling like, well, what now? Like, what happens now? Who's going to be with him or her? Who's going to be with the person I care about now? Are they going to be alone? and this is hard for us. I think it's natural for it to be hard for us to feel that way. So that's why today, and I don't know, today, for the last 50 or 60 years, since we've kind of professionalized the mortuary and cemetery business, there's a real unknown about what happens kind of after that, after the person's comes to take, and as the person's taken away, it's like, well, what now? Like, what do I do now? And it's a strange feeling of more helplessness, more of questions. And so it's tough. It's in some ways, I think it's even harder today.
When Stan died, we had Chabad came out and washed his body and sat with his body until it was buried. What do they call it?
The Chevra Kadisha.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the rules of Tahara, of washing the body, of being with the body as a shomer, as a guard.
Yeah.
Not everybody has a shomer. I mean, I don't tell people they have to do a shomer. I mean, I trust the funeral staff and the mortuary staff, but all of that is to give dignity and to make sure that the body is never alone. And so it's
But, you know, he was robbed. He died in the bank, and he was robbed from that time to somewhere in the emergency people or the hospital or something. You took all of his belongings.
oh no.
Wallet. Yeah.
Oh my God.
My son was just so upset. You know, it was like,
Sorry.
people are at their most vulnerable. You don't want to leave them.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally I get it. That's even worse. But again, this is a portion that where when we read Chaye Sarah, as we did back in November, where we think about the mitzvah of burial, where we teach about it, where we try to sensitize people to what goes into a Jewish to Jewish life cycle for around regarding death. And it was often the time when people would raise money for funerals, for funeral services for the people who are poor, because there's always been like costs associated with burial, but especially once we kind of had cemeteries in cities and things like that, where we didn't own the land, if you will. We had funeral expenses, and if families couldn't take care of it, there was always what we call a Chevra Kadisha society, which literally means friends of the holy. Nothing about death in it, right? We use euphemisms when we talk about death. Not that we're afraid of it, but we talk about it not from the standpoint of this is about death, but that this is about caring for people. So one of the things that I have from my great grandfather in Minnesota was he was the head of the burial society for his community in the Twin Cities. So I have his little book for the board of the Chevra Kadisha Society. It's called Chesed Ve'emet, the loving mercy and truth. Again, nothing about death in it, but that was the name of their society. And they had bylaws and things like that, but they had to make sure that people had a burial no matter what, that they had to have that. So when we get to this Torah portion, people would go around and ask for donations for the Chevra Kadisha, for the burial society, to make sure that it could be taken care of for everybody, that every Jew was supposed to be buried. And that is still the case today. There is a Chevra Kadisha society in Los Angeles that makes sure, with the help of Jewish Family Services and the cemeteries, that there are people who, that everybody can be buried. I can't hear, somebody's not muted. But anyways, this is the Torah portion where we focus our attention on that mitzvah because of Sarah and how Abraham does this. Any questions or comments before we continue? So that's it. I mean, that's like the first 4 verses. And now we're going to get into the tachlis, as we say in Yiddish, the business of purchasing your burial plot, which is a time for me to tell you, don't wait until you're dealing with a funeral of someone to do this. And again, everybody says, well, you're just, you're trying to get me to buy my plot ahead of time. It's a terrible time for people to have to make financial decisions. And in some cases, very expensive financial decisions while they're grieving. And none of us knows when our time is, but at the same time, again, it's something we shouldn't push off, because again, it's not a financial issue that like you're going to save a whole lot of money by doing it ahead of time, which you could. If you buy a plot 30 years before with inflation, you will save money almost assuredly. Maybe it wasn't so much over the last 30 years, but over the last year, it's been a critical enough issue that inflation is now starting to something that we're thinking about and talking about. So it actually may be, but who knows? I'm not saying it. Nothing to do with finances. It has to do with people's emotions and the fact that nobody should be in a situation when they walk into a cemetery or mortuary, which it's their business, folks. Every person who comes into that, hopefully they'll treat them with respect, but every person there is a customer. Every person who comes in there, they are treating them to some extent with hopefully a whole lot more dignity than you have when you go into a car dealership. But every single person there is, in the sense, there with an almost unlimited amount of how much they can spend. And so they will sell people coffins that can run a whole gamut of prices. They can sell people services that they may or may not need, and they just don't know, including things, that they just don't know what to do, as far as if somebody says, hey, do you want to have this? Do you want to have that? Do you want to have this person do this? And you just don't know. And, do you need a hearse? Do you need this? And people don't know. And they're so emotional that they'll just say yes to everything because they don't know. And so, you don't need to have a hearse. You don't need to have a hearse take the family. The burial could be 100 yards from the chapel, and that's it. Nowadays, people are just doing graveside services. They're not even need to pay for a chapel. All of these kinds of things, these are not decisions that people should make while they're grieving. And Avraham has to. And so the interesting thing is that because he doesn't control the land, he's been promised the land by God. He has to now go to the inhabitants of the land and says to them, I'm a resident alien among you, so sell me a site. So he has to do that. Now, again, he's been told by God it's his land, but it's not his land yet. His family isn't strong enough to make a claim for the land or anything else, so he has to purchase it. This is the only land that Abraham ever purchases in the land of Israel. It's also the only place where we actually read about him essentially digging the hole or doing any improvements on it, because everything else we've seen him do has been planting trees and digging wells, but he's never done anything to actually take permanent ownership of a piece of land other than like maintaining the land and essentially taking care of it for everybody. But now he's going to do something that's going to be his family's mark on the land, which is burying his wife and then again purchasing the place for the rest of his family. Because he doesn't just say this is for my wife, he says for my dead, meaning for anyone, including my wife, but anyone else in the future. This is where they will be buried. And here's what happens. And this is the business of it. The Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, hear us, my Lord, you are elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. So they start off beautifully complimenting him and telling him, even invoking that God must have, has chosen you, and they say, bury your dead wherever you want. No one is going to withhold his place for you, which, by the way, seems to indicate that, people have special areas where they bury their dead. They don't just bury their dead anywhere. There are tombs, or there are areas where there are tombs. Thereupon, Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the Hittites, and he said to them, if it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede with me with Ephron, the son of Zohar. So he says to them, if you really want to help, okay, if that's what you say, I know where I want to be buried. I want to know where the tomb is going to be. It's in the place that Ephron of Zohar owns. This guy Ephron has a place, and that's where I want to bury my dead. So he's told them, but he's told them in a kind of a very formal way. The whole discussion is very formal. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me as the full price, at the full price, for a burial site in your midst. So he tells them specifically, it's the cave of Machpelah, and he owns it, and it's at the edge of his land, which seems to mean, again, it's not that in the heart of his land. It's on his property though. And let him sell it to me for the full price. That's what it says. Kesev maleh. He can sell to me, not at a discount. I mean, I'll pay the full price. And Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite answered Avraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all who enter the gates of his town, saying, so he's there, he hears it, and he says, no, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. So he says, no, I give it to you. I give you that cave that's there. Give you the field. And I give you the field, but I give you the cave and I give you the field around it. I give it to you in front of everybody here. Bury your dead, right? It's yours. Nothing. You don't have to pay me. I give it to you. Now, it seems as though that means you don't have to pay for it. If we ended it there, you would have just thought, well, Abraham got a free cave for his burial and the land around it. Then Abraham bowed low before the people of the land. And he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, if only you would hear me out, let me pay for the price of the land, accept it for me that I may bury my dead there. And so he says to them, listen, hear me. I'll pay for the price of the land, accept it for me that I may bury my dead here. He's saying, I'm going to pay for it, right? I'm not going to let you give it to me. It's difficult to read this and not think that Avraham is like trying to pay for something that he doesn't need to pay for, right? It seems as though it's like, but you said it was free. Why are you now paying for it, Avraham? Like, part of us as we're reading this, we're like, why is Avraham doing this? He was just told he's going to get something for free, and now he's trying to pay for it. Who does that? So look at what happens here. Ephron replied to Avraham, saying to him, my Lord, do hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver? What is that between you and me? Go bury your dead. So Ephron, just in the negotiation, told him how much the property is worth, or at least how much he wants for the property. Now, of course, the question is that a fair market value for the land in those days? Is it a good deal? That's one of the things we're going to ask, right? No, it's difficult to know, but it does seem pretty high based on our understanding of value and things like that in those days. It seems like a pretty expensive ask, if you will. So it's difficult to know exactly how much the shekel was worth in those days of silver. It says silver, but it does seem to be maybe overvalued. Now, part of the problem is that it seems as though this is what Ephron wanted all along. It doesn't seem like he's just being generous and saying, here, take the land, but that he does feel that the land is worth something, And if he's going to lose it, who's going to be held accountable for it? And if at some point a good relationship with the Hittites isn't there anymore, is Abraham and his family going to get thrown out of that piece of the piece of property, right? If they don't own it, what protects them? And so Abraham definitely wants to make sure in front of everybody that not only was it offered him for free, he didn't take it for free. He paid for it, and he paid maybe overpriced for it. Because the next line says, Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate. It actually says that. It actually says at the rate of exchange. It doesn't just say gave him 400 shekels. It was 400 shekels at the rate at the time. And so it says, so Ephron's land in Machpelah near Mamre, past the field with its cave and all its trees, anywhere within the confines of that field, passed to Abraham as his possession in the presence of the Hittites, of all who entered the gate of his town. So this transaction happened in front of everybody. Everybody saw what happened. No one could claim that it didn't happen. It was done in front of witnesses. It was all above board. And this is the first piece of land that the Jewish people own in the land of Israel, in Canaan. It's the first purchase of land. Now, this is an interesting story to some extent, because before Israel was established in 1948, the Jewish people set about the process of buying the land of Israel at the time, even before it was Palestine, under the Turkish authority. They purchased the land of Israel from the Turks starting back in the 1800s with money that was raised from some of the biggest Jewish financiers in the world. We're talking about people like the Rothschilds, the Montefiore's, some of the wealthiest Jewish families in Europe. American Jewish families were not quite as successful yet in the 1800s. By the 1900s, you had people also giving money to Israel, people like Brandeis, Louis Brandeis, Chief Justice. You had some other people, other business people in America that were supporting Israel by the early 1900s. But still, most of the wealth was concentrated in these European families and these dynasties. And they gave money for Jews to purchase the land from the Turks. And those purchases became essentially, to some extent, the backbone of Israel's first settlements, the first kibbutzim and the first farms. And those purchases became very important in establishing Jewish ownership of the land in pre-British period. Because they would literally just say to the British, hey, look, the Rothschilds purchased this land for us, or purchased this land, we own it. And so the British kind of were in a situation where not only are they saying, well, we understand we're in control of Israel now, but there's actually Europeans who own this land, European families that they didn't want to alienate, who own the land. So it was interesting that that's the way Israel got started in the modern era, was through land purchases. And the Turks were only too happy in the latter days of their empire to sell the land. And there are, these are legal documents that are produced, and in some cases, again, establish the Jewish ownership of the land even before Israel became a state in 1948. That's what the Jewish National Fund was started for. The JNF was started before over 100 years ago, to establish Jewish land purchases. All of those Jewish land purchases were collectively put under the umbrella of Karen Kayemet, of the Jewish National Fund, after Israel was established, because there is no privately owned land in the land of Israel, with a couple of minor exceptions, including the Rothschilds, by the way, who own a beautiful piece of land near Caesarea in Caesarea. There is no private land ownership in the land of Israel. Israel never has allowed private land purchases, partly because they know what happens, which is that other governments come into power who don't respect them. So the land can be leased, 99-year leases, but it cannot be purchased. So we follow the Torah on that, and we follow kind of the Jewish tradition that the land only belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. So that is kind of the way Israel has kind of prohibited these kinds of things from happening, of land purchases that no one really recognizes, which Abraham is definitely concerned with, which is why he does it in the presence of everybody.
So
Not
like,
necessarily what, yeah.
so how do families pass down apartments? Like in Jerusalem, I know.
Oh, they can pass them down as long as the family still has the ownership, and they can renew the lease. The lease is renewable. You don't have to pay to renew. I mean, you have to pay something to renew it, some government fee to renew it. You will, but remember, none of these leases have come due yet. They're all in the first, the first 73 years of these leases. So a lot of this is going to come up in 25 years or so. We're going to get hit with how Israel is going to go about renewing the ownership stuff, but it's just going to be a formality. I mean, Israel's not the only country that has that rule, by the way.
Really? Who
Nope.
else has that rule?
I will tell you that some countries won't sell to people who are, I'll tell you what countries have nationalized land. I'll give you one example. Like in Mexico, you cannot own land a U.S. citizen can't own land within 31 miles of the coast, or it says 62 miles from the international border. So like the most desirable land in Mexico, which is coastal property, you and I, if we're not Mexican citizens, we can't buy beachfront there. You can buy land inside the country that probably no one wants to buy. You can buy a farm and wherever. And I don't even want to. Yeah, some of these places that are pretty rough to get to, you can probably get that. But yeah, Mexico did that so that Americans couldn't wind up owning the land and claiming that they want to be part of America. So that's why they didn't allow Americans to do that. But yeah, other countries have the land is nationalized. I'm trying to find out which other countries do that. Maybe someone will pop in with what countries have that, but it's not unheard of where private citizens can't own land. Let me just tell you. Yeah, it's an interesting, it's kind of an interesting way of prohibiting.
Well, I knew we couldn't buy land in Mexico. I just I've never heard of a country where you can't buy the land. I said maybe American Indians, the indigenous people feel like you couldn't buy the land.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, but
That's okay.
but I will tell you that America has pretty good laws when it comes to land ownership. And we, we'll invoke eminent domain. The government will occasionally, invoke eminent domain and take away someone's land for a freeway or for a stadium or something like that. But there are countries where, again, they do stuff like where you can. Here's Australia. You can lease it for 99 years. So that's in Australia, parts of Australia. I don't know if it's all of Australia. Yeah, I don't know. There's other countries. China has that rule too.
Really?
Yeah. I guess. I don't know. I'll read more about it. I'll tell you next week. The other countries where you can't own land. But Yeah, it's a little different than our American kind of feelings like, if I own my land, I can do whatever I want on it. It's a little different when it's not really yours. So it says that after that, and then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. So that is how Machpelah became the burial place of our patriarchs and matriarchs. We will revisit it when we come to the other people who are buried there, including, again, all the way through Jacob's family. There is a question. We know Jacob and Leah are buried there. Rachel isn't buried there. She's the only one of the matriarchs who's not buried there. Well, I shouldn't say that because we're not, well, so we're not sure, by the way, though, where Jacob's sons are buried. There is a tradition that they're all buried there, with the exception of Joseph. Of course, Joseph is buried at Shechem in Nablus. He has his own tomb. But we don't know where the other 11 sons are buried. So there is a tradition that the other 11 sons and Dinah are buried in the Machpelah cave as well. But we're not exactly sure. We know that the patriarchs and matriarchs. There is an interesting tradition, my friends, which doesn't seem to be based in the Torah and what we just read, but it is based on a tradition that actually in that cave of Machpelah, in another compartment that we don't get to see, that's where Adam and Eve are buried too. Like, Adam and Eve are buried there too? Yep. They are buried according to the Midrash, and they are buried in the cave of Machpelah. So that somehow, again, being connected and buried next to the original parents is fitting. But there is something really special about going to the place where your family is buried. Yeah.
This is interesting because he's buying the land because he wants to have permanent ownership of this land to have his family buried in.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't take it by free or something. He exchanged money for that.
Yep.
In the land of Israel, and it wasn't for 99 years. It was, for even till now.
Yep. And as we like to remind people, there are still Jews who want to be really close to that place, which is why we have Jews living in Hebron, completely surrounded by Palestinians. And it is one of the more contentious and difficult places to visit. It's difficult for the people who live there, but there are Jews who will never leave that site. I will tell you that there were Jews who were living in that site in the 1800s, in the 1700s, 2,000 years ago. There have always been Jews who've been by the cave of Machpelah, always. And we read about them in the Middle Ages. We read about it all throughout history. For thousands of years, there was a Jewish pilgrimage site at Hebron where people would come. If you were Jewish, one of the first places you would go to, even before you went to Jerusalem, and Hebron is only 20 minutes outside of, or 15 miles, a couple hours journey by horseback, maybe 3 or 4 hours of journey by horseback. People would go to Hebron even before they went to Jerusalem. It was one of the main pilgrimage sites in Israel. There were 4 sites. One of them was Hebron. One of them was Jerusalem. One of them was Tiberias. Tiberias is where a lot of the sages are buried, including Maimonides, and a lot of the rabbis of the Talmud are buried there. And the other place was Sfat, which was where the Kabbalistic center was in Sfat. So those 4 cities, 2 in the north and 2 in the south, were the main places where Jewish pilgrimages would go from pretty much the Middle Ages all the way, again, through the modern era, though today Hebron is someplace that I haven't even been to in the last 25 years. I haven't even been to Hebron because it's been so dangerous since the Intifada, the first Intifada started in about 25 years ago. It's been a very unsafe place to go. So
isn't that where Goldberg, I think his name was Goldberg, shot those people?
Yes. So there's definitely been a lot of tension there. There's a lot of tension in Hebron. In 1929, there was a massacre of the Jewish residents of Hebron by the Arabs. That was in 1929. It was one of the most horrific pre-Israel attacks in the land of Israel. It was the most horrific inside Israel. And then there was a horrible attack on Palestinians in the late 80s. Baruch Goldstein opened fire in a mosque and killed several of the worshipers of the who were worshiping there before he was also killed. And it's kind of the worst example of Jews killing Arabs. It is the worst. It was what year was it? It was 19. I'll tell you what it was. Maybe it was late 90s. It was 1999. It was 23 years. No, 1994. Sorry. So it was 30. It was pretty close to 30 years ago. I was thinking. I just forget 30 years ago. It was 1994. So yeah, that was a horrific.
So I wondered how we kept it all this long. I guess we kept it because we've always lived there.
Yeah, and so Israelis who live there now are risking their lives on a daily basis to be there.
Yeah.
So, but there will be always Israelis. There will always be Jews who want to live in Hebron. So, whatever happens with the final negotiated situation with the Palestinians, there will not be. Jews will be in Hebron. Israel is not going to leave Hebron the way that they've left other places like Gaza and stuff like that without having, again, a Jewish presence in the cave of Machpelah. There's no way. I mean, I know you're saying like, well, could be. No, not. It's not. It was not with Gaza. It's not like that. So there'll be a civil war in Israel if they ever allowed even people who are not that much in support of the settlers in Israel would be upset if Jews weren't able to go to Hebron. And again, not a lot of Jews go to Hebron because you have to go through such security measures to get there. You have to go on a bulletproof bus to get there. It's a real pain in the neck. But the ability to go there, Jews will not give up the ability to go there. So that is Hebron. And it is, again, a very tense place today to see. I mean, it's not as tense as it's been in other times, but it's always tense. There's a level of tension. If our level of tension right now, and I'm talking about like in the worst times in America, is like a 3 or 4 or 5, it's always a 7 there, and sometimes it gets up to a 9 or 10. In that fact that you literally feel like you're surrounded. I mean, like you're at the Alamo. So, not good tension to live under, and it shouldn't have to be like that. But it's, again, why should Jews not be able to live in a place where we've lived for thousands of years? I've said before, and many times, whatever the final negotiations are with the Palestinians, if there are areas where Jews can't live and are not allowed to live, then we failed to some extent, because there should be no part of the world that a Jew shouldn't be able to live in if they want to. I mean, it's the bottom line. Kind of my feeling. All right. So now we're going to turn to the celebration of life that we come to when we get to a marriage, which is one of the most wonderful things that we have in life, to go to a marriage, to participate in a marriage, to see someone we care about getting married. The life cycle event, to some extent, that we have no control over by ourselves. We're partners in it at the very best. At the very worst, we're only 50% involved. It's not like a marriage. I mean, not like a birth or death or a bar mitzvah, where it's pretty much on you. It's what you do. It's now what we do. And I looked at it in 2020, because of the pandemic. I was only able to officiate at 4 weddings during the entire year. Last year in 2021, we made up for it a little bit with 11. And in 2022, I think I'm already scheduled to do, 13 weddings. And even today, I was asked to do a wedding in October. So it's looking like it's going to be a really good year for weddings, and for people who've put off this decision, or the ability to have people coming to a wedding. People are at least putting it on their schedule, which is good news. So yeah, 2020 was not a good year when it came to that. And of those 4 weddings that I officiated at, 2 of them ended up having bigger weddings in 2021 where they could actually have people. So it was not an easy year. All right. So let's get to the wedding. Abraham was now, well, actually, to the betrothal. Abraham was now old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things, which is an interesting line to come off with right after we hear about his wife dying.
Mhm.
But there is a recognition that Abraham has now entered a stage of his life where, he's had a good life, but he's got to think about the future, and the future, to some extent, where he's not going to be here. So Abraham said to the senior servant of his household, who was in charge of all that he owned, "Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go forth to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac." Now, it's interesting that he's putting someone else in charge of this. Now, you can make the argument because he can't, but why doesn't he let Isaac do it? Why isn't Isaac finding his own wife? In the next generation, Isaac sends his son Jacob to go get a wife from the same area, by the way, from the same family, by the way. But he doesn't do that. He actually says to his senior servant, who we assume to be Eliezer, it doesn't actually say his name is Eliezer, but we assume it to be Eliezer because it earlier said that he was in charge of his household. Remember, that was at one point the guy that Abraham says to God, "Make him my heir." And God says, "No, not him." Eliezer, we don't know a lot about him. We don't know who he was. He was definitely trusted by Abraham. Abraham makes him swear that he's going to do this thing. Now, it's a very interesting thing, by the way, when you really look at it. Put your hand under my thigh. What is that about?
Yeah, that's the first time we've read that.
Yeah, that's
I know
a weird phrase, and it's the only time we see this in the Bible, where there's an oath that is part of it is required to be very, very intimate with the person that you're signing a deal with, making a promise to. That's a big step in the relationship. When he tells the guy, "You put your hand under my thigh," that's really close to your private areas. And some people feel that it's literally, and I'm not making this up because I couldn't make this up, and I think maybe you've thought it yourself too. It seems as though under your thigh might be even closer than just the thigh. And that literally Eliezer has to promise by essentially saying, I'm taking your future. I'm saying this in a very euphemistic way. Abraham, I'm taking care of your future by, Abraham says to him, I'm essentially leaving my genealogy, my future progeny in your care. I'm entrusting myself, my future to you. And so that's what actually this oath is. And that's why it's such an intimate oath, because it's actually representing the future for Abraham. So after having this negotiation with the Canaanites, it's interesting that he turns around and says to his head of his household, "I don't want these people in my family. I just negotiated with them. I'll do whatever. I live with them. I do their stuff, but we are not marrying with them," which again is an interesting juxtaposition, because we just had this seemingly pleasant negotiation with them, but clearly Abraham isn't real taken with the Canaanites. He's not wanting them as part of his family. Servant said to him, "What if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? And shall I take your son back to that land from which you came?" And Abraham answered him, "On no account must you take my son back there." And you notice how they put a exclamation right there after that. It's kind of a weird, well, it's not weird to put the exclamation on it, but it is weird that Abraham is so freaked out by the idea of Isaac leaving. Why does he not want Isaac to leave? Somebody give me an answer.
because the land's been given to him.
Yeah, but it was given to him, and he left the land. He went to Egypt.
That's true.
Well, we're not sure. I mean, I'm asking because it's not kind of like settled answer of why he doesn't want to.
Well, there are no explanation marks in Hebrew, right? So is there something in the Hebrew
No,
that put that?
no, but the reason why we have the exclamation there is he says to him, says, Vayomer Elav Avraham, Hishmar Lecha. And he says, the phrase Hishmar Lecha is like, a command. You cannot do this. Pentashiv, you cannot take him back there. There's no going, he's not going there. Now, interestingly, Avraham doesn't go there either. Now, I will tell you, keep this in mind because of what we see when he goes there. When Isaac goes there, when Eliezer goes there, and when Jacob will go there the next generation, you'll see why. Well, for those who may not be here in a couple of weeks when we read the story, I just remind you of this because I think many of you will know this too. When Jacob goes there, when Isaac's son Jacob will go there to his own family, remember these are his people too. This is Jacob's family through Rebekah, through his mom. They kind of screw him over a little bit. If you remember, Laban does not treat his nephew / son-in-law very well. He tricks him, right? And he gets him to stay there even longer. So as much as Abraham doesn't want his son to marry the Canaanites, there's also this sense that maybe what goes on there is not good either. And I don't want my son to get caught in their craziness back there. So Canaanites are bad, but don't think that the people back up in Aram are much better. Just keep that in mind. Okay. So that's why I said, you can see Abraham says no. I will tell you this too. Isaac is the only one of the three patriarchs who never leaves the land. Isaac never leaves Israel. He never leaves. And there is a tradition that this is one of the things that makes Isaac so holy, so special. Even though he doesn't seem to have a very good life, he seems to have a lot of weird stuff happen to him, and he seems passive, and he seems like timid maybe. He does have this special distinction that he never leaves the land. And the rabbis actually account that as a good thing. Not that, we like to travel and go on cruises and things like that. But back in the day, there might have been a sense that if you have to travel, it's probably not out of fun. It's out of necessity. It's because you had to. And that the holy nature of the land of Israel sustained Isaac and kept him alive and kept him going in a way that the other patriarchs lose their energy by not being connected to the land. How do we know that? Because Isaac lives longer than all the other patriarchs. Not a lot longer, but a little bit longer than his father and a little bit longer than his son. He lives to be 180. It's like he gets a life and then a bonus half a life. So Isaac does seem to gain some maybe extra energy, if you will, from the land, but he does not leave the land. He doesn't even leave the land to get his wife. And it seems to be part of Abraham's agenda for whatever reason. But keep it in mind as we read this.
Was Abraham concerned that, that would be a step backwards if Isaac came back from Israel, and that's why he didn't want him to return? That, it just wasn't part of the destiny, if you will?
Yeah, but what do you mean a step back? What did you mean by that?
Well, that when I say back there, do you mean that he'd be returning from Israel if he wasn't able to find a wife? I guess find a wife there. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that.
No, but there is well, I will tell you this: the words pentashiv in Hebrew are do not go back. Now, what's interesting is he means not going back to Aram, not going back to Syria. So what's interesting is that Abraham seems to think that going, if Isaac makes that step, he's going backwards. So he doesn't want his son to go back to the place that he lived in for a while where he
that's what I mean. It would be kind of going in the wrong direction of where he wanted things to progress.
Yeah. And I think there is that sense. And again, there were Jews who felt that way when they came to America. They said, don't ever go back to Russia, right? Never go back to the old country. Why would anyone go back to Europe? And I know people who lived in Europe for a while whose parents were upset that they went back. They said, that's going backwards. You're going back to the land of death. You're going back to, whether even if it was Germany, even if it wasn't Germany, going back to Europe is like going backwards. And I think people felt that way about, in a weird way, when people from New York moved to LA, and then people from their next generation moved back to New York, people would go, why are you going back there? Why would anyone go back? It's like, we left there for a reason. Your parents and grandpa, whatever, they came out west for a reason, to get out of the cold or get out of the dirt. And of course, it's, there's a difference of living in the Lower East Side in the 1900s versus going back to live in the Lower East Side today, by the way, which you can't afford living in the Lower East Side where it used to be tenements. But there was a real sense that New York was going backwards. So it's funny how we have that, though.
Now they just moved somewhere else, like Nevada or Texas. Yeah.
Well, we keep moving west until I guess I tell my kids, you're all going to live in China one day. But I said, interestingly though, we do go back. Some of us make Aliyah, we go back to Israel, and that we don't say is going backwards. We had thousands of Jews who actually made Aliyah last year, including some people in our own synagogue. We had Jonathan Schaefer, who was bar mitzvah about 14 years ago at our temple. He made Aliyah last year and is living in Israel now. I was just talking or emailing with his dad, Jim Schaefer. And so we've had a few kids make Aliyah, some kids serving in IDF. But the real cool thing is that, we don't see that. We don't see going back to Israel as going back, even though it's going back to our original place. It's not going backwards. So we oftentimes think of that as really going to the heights. So and Sarah Redson, she lived in Israel for a while, so she actually got the experience of living in Israel, which is a cool thing. But he says, don't go back there, right? Don't take my son back there. And that's what the word and that's what he says, because again, he says, now the Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from my native land. By the way, here it seems that again, we talk about, there seems to be kind of two different versions of where Abraham's from. One of them, that he's from Ur of the Chaldees, which is Mesopotamia. The other version seems to be that when he takes off from his father's house in Aram, it's Aram, it's Syria, and that seems to be where his father's house is. Because here, and he kind of affirms that in this version, this kind of version, which says, "From my native land, where I was born, in my father's house, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign you this land as your offspring. He will send his angel before you, and you will get a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of the oath to me, but do not take my son back there." So he says, I came from that place. God told me this is my place now. And Abraham now gives him some information that he didn't tell him at first, which is that he will send his angel before you. And so he says there's literally going to be an angel who's going to help you in this. So whether we see that angel or not, a parent, that's kind of up to you. Midrash definitely picks up the fact that Eliezer is under angelic protection and assistance this whole time. But what's cool about it is that Abraham says to his servant, if you don't find a woman there, you're free. You're not bringing it. And he says it again, do not bring my son there. Lo tashev shama. Do not bring him there.
But if he thought so poorly of that area, why did he want to find a wife for his son from that area?
What do you think? Well, I mean, what's your thought on that, Jane? Where would you go from that?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
So here's what we can take away from it, which I think is kind of an amazing idea. And it's one that we do get in Genesis. And I think we get it in Judaism, which is you don't have, well, let me say this first. Compared to the Canaanites, his family back in Aram is okay. It's just, they're not good people. I don't want him back there. I don't want him with those people, but they're the best we got. We don't have any other options. The Canaanites are off the table. They are not in consideration. So it gets to this biblical idea, which is sometimes we don't have good choices. Sometimes our best choice is still not so good. Now, what we're going to see is that well, when we get to Rebekah, there's hope here. But what's so interesting about this is that this biblical idea, I just want to hammer home, because if you keep one thing in mind from the way what the Bible really tells us, especially when it comes to family stuff, especially when it comes to living life in the real world, it's not always easy. And sometimes the best choice we have still stinks. And that's my takeaway from this, and not just here, but other places as well, which is that sometimes you got to make the best of a bad situation. And how relevant and how powerful is that for us today? Sometimes, the choices presented to us, none of them are good, but we got to take the best choice. That being said, even within that, you don't give up, and you don't let down your guard, right? And so if you got to make a bad decision, you're going into a situation that's a little bit sketchy. He doesn't say, just take my son, we'll deal with it. We don't have a choice. He says, no, you go, you take care of it, bring her back. He's not going. So as much as he doesn't like this choice, he still protects himself and protects Isaac by not sending him there. And so there's this sense that just because you have to make a bad decision doesn't mean you just go, whatever, I'm going to make the decision. And then I'm not going to be protected. If you're in a situation and it's not a good situation, you don't give up and say, well, it's already a bad situation. You still, in the midst of doing this thing, you protect yourself as much as you can. And so when you have to step into a situation that's not good, you don't just say, well, I'm just throwing it. It's already bad. No, you never give up, and you never give up your protection. You never give up that layer of whatever you have to do to protect yourself. And to me, that's like, you don't just say, hey, well, whatever, I have to go into a really unsafe area, so it doesn't really matter. No, you take precautions. Hopefully you're not in a situation where you actually have to worry about being armed, but whatever you do, whatever precautions you take, you go into it so that you aren't unprotected. You wear a bulletproof vest, or you do what you do what you need to do so that you're protected. If you go into a country where it's not safe, it doesn't mean you just go, well, it's already unsafe, so whatever happens. No, you take precautions. And so that's what he does here. He says, yeah, we have to do this, but I'm not throwing all caution to the wind. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Avram and swore to him as bidden. And then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and set out, taking with him all the bounty of his master. All the bounty, that's a lot, because Avram's pretty wealthy, and has made his way to Aram Naharaim, to the city of Nahor, which is Avraham's brother's city, right? And it says right there, the city of Nahor. So this is his family city, and it's Aram Naharaim. It's Aram between the rivers. So it's Aram in the Mesopotamian area. It's in Syria, and it is the Arameans become a people in their own right. They become the Syrian people, not Assyrian, but the Syrian people. And it's where we get the word Aramaic from too. So he made the camels kneel by the well outside the city at evening. And I will tell you, this is a long chapter. So even though we're in chapter 13, this is all we're reading today, because it's a really long chapter. The Christians who organized the chapters and verses didn't want to break up this story. I'm not exactly sure why. But it's a really long It's a really long chapter. So he brings the camels into the town, to the area where they dwell, where they bring the water, the well where they draw water from, at a time when the women will come out to do it. So, he's smart about where he goes. He goes to the places where you're going to be able to pick up women, which in those days was the local watering hole. It was the watering hole. That's what they called it, the watering hole. And it is, it's the well. It's the well. So it's the place where everybody would come for their family's water. And he said, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham, grant me good fortune this day and deal graciously with my master Abraham. Here I stand by the spring as the daughters of the townsmen come out to draw water." Now notice, by the way, he calls God "O Lord," he says, "Adonai," he says, "God of my master Abraham." He doesn't say my God, he says, "God of my master Abraham." So there seems to be a little bit of, but it's okay. It's not a bad prayer, but he's not recognizing him as his God. He recognizes him as Abraham's God. And he says, help Abraham. So he says, "I stand by the spring. Let the maiden to whom I say, 'Please lower your jar that I may drink,' and who replies, 'Drink, and I will also water your camels,' let her be the one whom you have decreed for your servant Isaac. Thereby I know that you have dealt graciously with my master." So he sets a deal with God that if somebody says, I'm going to draw water for you and also for your camels, because he's by the well. This is kind of their well, and this is his way of kind of testing. Now, some people have pointed out over the years and the generations, this is a ridiculous thing to say, because it'd be hard enough that the person would say, "Let me get you some water." That's normal, but let me get you water for your camels. Now, on one hand, you could say, well, it's just showing how compassionate this person is. There are other people who say, but it's taking it a step too far. Is Eliezer actually setting up a situation here where he gets out of the deal? Does he actually say to God something to the effect of, well, if all these things happen, then I know that, it's the right person. So does he set a mark that's too high? In which case Eliezer's trying to get out of this deal so that he doesn't get Isaac a wife. So there's different ways of looking at it. And there's definitely a sense that either one could be true, where maybe he is putting something out here that doesn't seem to be possible. But this is what he's done. He had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with a jar on her shoulder. So this makes it seem like it's really, there was an angel here, helping out, that pushed all this stuff together. Here's the blood, here's his words, and then makes it happen. And it tells us right away who Rebekah was. Rebekah is Abraham's, essentially, it's his grandniece, right? It's his brother's granddaughter. Okay. So Bethuel is her father, and Bethuel's father is Nahor. So this is how they're related. So technically, it's not Isaac's cousin, it's Isaac's cousin's daughter. That's the relationship. A cousin once removed. So what does it say about Rebekah? The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. So I guess everything you need to know about Rebekah is that she was a beautiful woman. She was a virgin. That's what it says. Betula. As we talked about yesterday in class, we have words in Hebrew for different statuses of situations. We talked about a barren woman, an akara. We also have this word betula, a virgin. These are words that we have in Hebrew. I mean, the word virgin in English also exists. So it's not like, we don't have a word for it too. We don't, as we said, we don't have a word for barren in English. We say barren woman, which is two words, but we don't have one word to describe that. But anyways, she's there, and it says,
and she's strong.
Very beautiful. Well, yeah, because she already filled the jar and came up. And the servant ran toward her and says, "Please let me sip a little water from your jar." And she says, "Drink, my lord," she said. And she quickly lowered her jar up upon her hand and let him drink. And when she had let him drink his fill, she said, "I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking." So she goes above and beyond, right? Because he just said, "Drink, and I'll also water your camels." She says, "I'm going to keep filling up that water until the camels have finished drinking," which, man, you can give camels water all day. That's a lot of water. So I'm going to fill up your car too. I'm going to fill up your camel. But
I hit this one right out of the park here, so to speak.
Yeah, she goes above and beyond. So he asked for above and beyond, and she went above and beyond and beyond. She
Yeah.
went even beyond that, because I'm not just going to just draw your water for your camels. I'm going to do it until they finish drinking. And that's what it says in Hebrew, until they can't drink anymore. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for the camels. The man, meanwhile, stood gazing at her, silently wondering whether the Lord had made his errand successful or not. Really? It seems as though there shouldn't be any question here. So there is this feeling that this line just gave away that Eliezer really doesn't want this happen. He doesn't want this to happen, because why else would he be sitting here wondering whether this is like, now he's like, oh no, it really, now, if he really wanted it to happen, why would he be wondering at this point? It seems like exactly what he said. And again, this is maybe a little angelic help with him, but whatever it is, it seems like you can't get any clear. Is there any a bigger level of clearance on this?
Maybe he's thinking this is too good to be true. Or something.
Maybe, but there is that sense that maybe Eliezer really doesn't want this to happen. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring, which is what it says, a nose ring, and weighing half a shekel, which is quite expensive, and of gold, right? And 2 gold bands for her arm, 10 shekels in weight. So it's quite a lot of stuff right off the bat that he's pulling off. Pray, tell me, he said, whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? And she replied, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. Wow, so this is exactly who he's looking for. Now he finds out who she actually is. And she went on, there is plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night. So we got everything you need at our bed and breakfast, at our Airbnb. And the man bowed low in homage to the Lord and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not withheld his steadfast faithfulness from my master. For I have been guided on my errand by the Lord to the house of my master's kinsman. So it seems like he seems pretty happy about it. So, bowing low and praying. And again, he's still referring to God as the God of my master Abraham. I think some people felt a little uncomfortable with the fact that he refers to God in that way. But again, if he's not a Hebrew, then why would he not say, makes sense he would say that. But it is a blessing. He really says, thank you, God. Baruch Adonai Elohei Adonai Avraham. So he's recognizing God's power here, which is a good thing. It seems like it's a good thing. Again, there's different possibilities. The first possibility is he's just a really nice guy and he does what he's told, and he's just that guy. There's another possibility, which is that he's a little dense, and that's why he wonders whether this is all right, and he's just kind of a little slow. The other possibility is he's downright not wanting to do this, and he doesn't really have a choice. And at this point, he realizes that it's out of his hands. God made this happen, so he can't fight it.
What's the downside of him doing it for him? I mean,
what do you think?
Why wouldn't he want to do it? I mean, it's
if Isaac doesn't find a wife and Isaac dies without children,
yeah,
who's next in line to get the stuff? He gets the stuff. So the less Isaac gets, the more he gets. And so maybe that's where they went with this, is that he definitely has been given a huge amount of responsibility by Abraham. He's definitely doing a whole lot. He's essentially got he's got underneath Abraham's thigh. So he's been given a whole lot of responsibility and a whole lot of trust. Has he been abusing that trust all along? So again, this is the kind of, and again, we have the tradition that Eliezer and Ishmael are the 2 men who went up with Isaac for his sacrifice. At the same time, again, maybe hoping that he will get sacrificed. So there's this traditional, that kind of exists with Eliezer being. There's also traditions that he's a nice guy too, but there are midrashim that he's got a vested interest in the failure of this mission and the failure of in Isaac not making it, so to speak. So the maiden ran and told all to her masters, her mother's household. It doesn't say her father's household, by the way. It says her mother's household, which is interesting. Why wouldn't she tell her dad, Bethuel? It's kind of weird, right? Now, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, which is the first, kind of introduction to Laban that we get. And you can see that Laban is not going to have, of course, he's going to have a role to play in our story later on in Jacob's story. But Laban runs out to greet the man at the spring. When he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms, and when he heard his sister Rebekah say, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went up to the man who was standing beside the camels at the spring. "Come in, O blessed of the Lord," he said. Baruch Adonai. He actually uses God's name. He said, "Why do you remain outside when I've already made ready the house and a place for your camels?" So the rabbis like to point out that he sees the gold, and that's what makes him perk up. As we know later on about Laban, is that Laban is all about the money, and he does not, that's all he sees. He sees the gold.
Ka-ching, yeah.
And he knows that this is a cash opportunity.
Yeah.
And so it's very strange because the dad doesn't seem to be in the picture, right? At this point, maybe we'd say the dad is dead. Like, where's the dad? He doesn't do anything. The mom, she goes and tells the mom. Laban comes out. And here's what it says. So the men entered the house and the camels were unloaded. The camels were given straw and feed, and water was brought to bathe his feet and the feet of the men with him. But when food was set before him, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my tale," he said. "Speak then." Or he said, "Speak then." So they put everything out, they're ready to go. And then he says, "I'm not going to eat. I'm not getting down to business yet. I'm not going to get down until we talk about business, which is, this is why I'm here. I am Abraham's servant." And that's what he says. Eved Avraham Anuchi. I am Abraham's servant. "The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he's become rich. He's given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore my master a son in her old age, and he has assigned to him everything he owns." So what has he said? He said who he is. He said that Avraham has done really well since he's left Aram. He's got everything. And he's the son of Sarah. Again, old age, we're reminded of the fact that this was a miracle child to some extent. But most importantly, he gets down to the business. And this story, like the story before it about Sarah's grave, we see the business aspects of what should be rituals and celebrations and life cycle events. But we see that there is a business element to this as well. Just as there was a business element to the purchase of a grave, there's a business element to this marriage discussion, which is he's rich. And his son, Isaac, the guy that I'm representing here, is getting everything. Now, what's interesting about this story is that that's actually not what happens. Now, Eliezer doesn't know that yet. None of us know it. It's because it hasn't happened yet. Abraham will have other sons. So Isaac doesn't get everything, but he gets a lot. Now, there's also Ishmael, which, we think Ishmael would get something too, along the lines of, some kind of inheritance. But it doesn't say. It just says he's getting everything. Isaac's getting everything. And again, it could be because they're getting something. They're getting some money. But as far as the land, as far as the property, as far as the will, it's all 100% him. And again, you could say he's getting everything, including, all the business. But these other people are getting a gift, and that is a difference between getting a gift and getting a percentage of the inheritance. If you give a gift to somebody, and literally, if you specify this in a will and say, okay, this person's getting $100,000, this person's getting this gold watch, this person's getting whatever, and then you say, but my child, whatever, gets 100% of my inheritance, that's still acceptable. It's not the 100%, obviously didn't cover the specified other amounts, but everything else that's in the assets would go to that person, with the exception of those things that are specifically, that are specified in the will. So it still exists. It's not really not true, but at this time, Abraham has pretty much left everything to Isaac. And he says, my master made me swear, you shall not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you will go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son. And I said to my master, what if the woman does not follow me? Now, he's telling the guys around the table everything that happened up until now. Now, again, you could just say he's a really honest guy, or he's kind of stupid, because why do you tell people information that they don't need to have?
Yes, it's not a very good negotiation platform, It's like, well, give up the farm here.
No. So he doesn't, he overshares, if you will, at the very least. And he says exactly what he said. He replied to me, the Lord in whose ways I have followed will send his angel with you and make your errand successful. You will get a wife for my son, for my kindred, from my father's house. Thus only shall you be freed from my adjuration. If, when you come to my kindred and they refuse you, only then shall you be freed from my adjuration, which is kind of, exactly pretty close to what, verbatim, but it's pretty close to what Avraham said. But it's interesting, he tells him that, because he's basically saying, if she doesn't come with me, I've done my part. I'm out of here. Time's done, which is interesting. Again, didn't have to say that. But he also then in here says that Abraham says that there's an angel who's going to be with you to make sure that your errand is successful. So God is going to make sure that this is going to happen. So he tells him that. He tells Rebekah's family that there's a heavenly presence here in this. I came today to the spring and I said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you would indeed grant access to the success to the errand of which I am engaged, as I stand by the spring of the water, let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I say, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and who answers, you may drink, and I will also dwell for your camels. Let her be the wife whom the Lord had decreed for my master's son. And I will tell you at this point, he's literally repeating the whole story, which is really strange. Which is, again, is he oversharing? Is there a reason why he's doing it? Does he have is he trying to subvert his own mission? I mean, all of these things are possibilities, because the level of detail in this is ridiculous. And we're literally on verse 44, which is already a long verse, and we're not done. I had scarcely finished praying in my heart when Rebekah came out with a jar on her shoulder and went down to the spring and drew. And I said to her, please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar and said, drink, and I will also water your camels. So I drank, and she also watered the camels. Now, at this point, he could have just said, she did everything I told her to do. I said was going to happen, and she did it. It didn't say that. It actually repeated the whole story again. I inquired of her, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Beth. I mean, the whole story. She told me where she could have just said, she told me who she was. I inquired of her, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bands on her arms. Then I bowed low in homage to the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who led me on the right way to get to the daughter of my master's brother for his son. He says, again, I bowed low to the Lord. And again, he says, the God of my master Abraham. Doesn't say to God, he says to the God of my master Abraham. And now, if you mean to treat my master with true kindness, and tell me, and if not, tell me also, that I may turn right or left, which seems to be a very formal way of saying, let's get down to business. Are we going to do this or not? And then Laban and Bethuel answered, the matter was decreed by the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go. Let her be a wife to your master's son, as the Lord had spoken. Now, what's so interesting about this is now Bethuel is actually speaking. Now, he doesn't speak alone. Notice Laban is with him too. So he is turning some responsibility over to his son, which is interesting, because it seems like this is a matter for the father, not for the brother to discuss. It's the father who should be discussing this. But Laban already seems to be involved. And of course, this is the same Laban who's going to be involved when his sister's son, when his nephew, another way of saying his nephew, Jacob, is going to come back and negotiate for his own wives, or wife, when he wanted one wife. But he says, they say, what can we do? It's God. Take her. Well, let it happen. Now, it seems exactly like the previous story. That's why it's so great to read these two stories back to back. The Canaanites said, just take the cave, take her, just take the cave, take the girl, take nothing for us to do. It's God. When Abraham's servant heard the words, he bowed low to the ground before the Lord. So it seems like, oh, that's it. She got some gold. He came with camels full of stuff. Is that it? Is that it? Does he get her for a couple armbands and a nose ring, which she didn't even give to them? It's her jewelry. Nope. The servant brought out objects of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. And he gave presents to her brother and her mother. Then he and the men ate and drank, and they spent the night. When they arose the next morning, he said, give me leave to go to my master. Now, there's an interesting point here, which is, again, he gives them all the stuff. There's the stuff. Again, it didn't seem like they were asking for the stuff, but Eliezer knows there's payment that has to be made, and he seems to go above and beyond. So he gives the presents to the brother and the mother, which is interesting because, again, where's Bethuel? Why doesn't Bethuel get the gifts? Why is the brother and the mother getting it? And some people have pointed out, well, it's because this Laban and his mother are not the only wives that Bethuel has, right? So maybe, again, the custom was when the daughter got married that the brother and the mother of that young woman would get the stuff. The father didn't necessarily take it, but that side of the family would get it. It was a way of ensuring that family would be covered. That's possible, but it's still a very weird thing that the father is there, then he's not there. And it says they ate and drank and they spent the night. And when they arose the next morning, he said, give me leave to go to my master. But her brother and mother said, let the maiden remain with us some 10 days, then you may go. Now we're starting to see something that we see with the Jacob story, which is that maybe it's not so easy to deal with these people. And again, maybe part of what they're doing is trying to trap them. Is there some funny business going on here? It doesn't seem like a normal situation. He said to them, do not delay me now that the Lord has made my errand successful. Give me leave that I may go to my master. So he says, no. Eliezer says, no, I'm going back. I did what I came here to do. I did my job. I got to go back home. And they said, let us call the girl and ask for her reply. So interestingly, they seem to say, well, let's check with Rebekah. What does Rebekah want to do? And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will. Well, it seems like they already negotiated. They seem like they already agreed to do it. Why are they now coming back and saying, are you ready to go? And it seems as though that maybe there was, not for sure, but maybe there was going to be some funny business that went on here. That maybe getting out of this town in one piece wasn't as easy as it appeared. And it says, and they sent off their sister Rebekah and her nurse along with Abraham's servants and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, O sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes. And then Rebekah and her maids arose, mounted the camels, and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and went his way. So they get out of there. And it seems as though, again, maybe there was a reason why they wanted to keep her there. We don't know where the dad is. I will say that there's an interesting midrash that I'm just going to tell you the midrash exists. I don't want to quantify it or qualify it as makes a lot of sense or it should be there, but there is an interesting in the background what's going on here. The midrash actually says that Bethuel, the father, and Laban, the brother, were actually going to poison Eliezer after he gave all the stuff and kill him. And basically, you know what happened? I don't know. The guy died. But they were going to kill him. So when Bethuel is not there at this point, when it says the brother and the mother said, let the maiden stay with us, and then you may go, or when it says, here's the key phrase. When the men ate and drank and they spent the night, they rose in the morning, they said, give me leave to go. That what happened there was that they tried to poison him. And I'm just saying what the midrash is. There was the angel in the background the whole time, just helping navigate the stuff and making the stuff happen. The angel does the old trick of moving back the poison in the cup that was supposed to go to Eliezer, goes back to Bethuel, and Bethuel winds up drinking the poison that was supposed to go to Eliezer, and he dies. I won't tell you, the midrash is all predicated on the fact that these were scoundrel people, not as bad as the Canaanites, but still pretty bad. And so the angel stopped this murder from happening so that they could get her out of there in one piece. No matter what, Rebekah seems to want to get out of there. So Rebekah seems cool all along, and it is that she is cool, and that the rabbis love Rebekah. They love her, and they say that she's a great matriarch. And even though maybe her brother, not maybe, her brother's is definitely a scoundrel. Laban tricked Jacob without a doubt. And maybe we don't know much about Bethuel, but maybe these are not good people. But Rebekah, as they like to call her in the midrash, she's the flower amongst the manure. And so this is
Oh boy.
This is what they.
That's a backhand.
This is what they call. Yeah, exactly. This is what they called her. But look, the Bible does say she's beautiful and she's very nice and has all the great qualities that you want from a young woman. But this idea that Rebekah is comes out of a family and out of a scene that's a bad scene is kind of an interesting idea, and it's one that also makes us think that you don't condemn a whole place, and there's good people there, and Rebekah definitely seems to be the right person. She might have some of the qualities, by the way, of her family, right? Because we know later on she tricks her husband, right? So Isaac will be tricked with food, by the way, when it comes time to do the blessing. So Rebekah isn't above a little trickery on her own.
This sort of rings of a Godfather sequel. You know?
Oh yeah. There's definitely she seems to be a woman of substance and a woman of ability to see the bigger picture, if you will. Yeah. But no matter what, it's her decision to go, and she says, "Let's go and let's get out of here." And so Rebekah seems to have all the qualities that we'd really want. We don't know how old she is, by the way. The ranges on how old Rebekah is here is insane, because it said that she was born at the end of the last chapter. So if she's just born then, she's pretty young. It could be that Abraham just had gotten the news that Rebekah was born at the end of, as we said, at the end of chapter 22, it says Rebekah's born. So it's a little problematic from the standpoint, if she's really, really young, that's kind of creepy, but it doesn't seem like she's really that young. So,
got to be strong enough to water all those camels.
I know, but right. The rabbis will also say that she's a super power person like the rest of our patriarchs and matriarchs. So the fact that she could have been as young as 8 is somewhat troubling. But anyways, just telling you what's there. But she is an amazing person. I don't think she's that young. She does get accompanied, as it says, with her nurse, which is the word that's used, right?
Yes.
But don't forget, the nurse is there, and well, she's pretty young too. In Romeo and Juliet, Juliet has her nurse too, right? Nurse. So that she was her governess, her nurse, whatever. But we do know that she's very close to Rebekah. And it says they sent off their sister Rebekah again with her nurse. And oh, by the way, one other thing, this blessing, oh sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads, is said by Laban, and it kind of says, it says they blessed her, right? They sent off their sister. So maybe there were other brothers too. This blessing, oh sister, is actually what we traditionally say to a woman at her wedding today. So this phrase is actually achotenu et haye, like may you live to have thousands and tens of thousands of descendants, is actually what we say at the Bedekin ceremony today. When we say essentially to the bride, it's time for you to go off and get married, as you're going to walk down the aisle, that's traditionally what we say to the bride. It's maybe not politically correct because it's saying that, you have to have a lot of kids, but it is the traditional blessing, which is interesting because it's originally said by a guy who's not so good, Laban. So it tells us that even those people can say really good things. But let's finish up with this beautiful story, and it really does end in a beautiful way. Then Rebekah and her maids arose. They mounted their camels and followed the man. And so the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lahai Roi, which is, by the way, this well area where Ishmael was, for he was settled in the region of the Negev, which, by the way, is not where his father was. The last time we saw our father, well, we don't know for sure he was still in Hebron, but he was not in that area. Which is interesting because, as we talked about the last chapter, in chapter 22, when they go off after the Akedah, after the binding of Isaac, they don't talk. And they didn't talk throughout this. You didn't miss it. There was no Isaac at his mother's funeral. There was no Isaac. It doesn't mean he wasn't there. It just doesn't say he was there. And there's no Isaac and Abraham discussing this scene of you're getting married. It's not part of the discussion. Here he is. He was settled in the region of the Negev. He's living in the south. And here's the line. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw the camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac, and she alighted from the camel. She came off of the camel, is what it says. Came down off the camel. And she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and she covered herself, which again is the veil that we put down at the wedding. We don't lift up the veil. We actually put down the veil at the Bedekin, at the Jewish marriage ceremony. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done, which, by the way, that's the short way of saying the story, right? You can't say that. You can say, hey, this is what happened. You don't have to tell it all. Because look, we're in the 67th verse. Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother, Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. He loved her. Isaac loved her, and thus found comfort after his mother's death. And so what we see, and that's the end. That's verse 67. That's the last verse. As we come to the end tonight, look at what happened. And this is why these two stories are so beautiful together, is that what happened here is that he found comfort after his mother's death. And this allowed him to, figure that he can go on. It took another, chapter of his life to kind of unfold for him really to move on. There's so much that in that one line, that he took her into his mother's tent. So he actually took the tent that his mother lived in and turned it into her tent, which is, you could say, well, that's kind of creepy. No, not really, because back in those days, tents weren't easy to come by, and it was probably a very special tent, and it was a tent that had a lot of meaning for him. And it's not like, when your mom dies in a house, you go, I can't live in that house anymore. You actually say, this is a house that has meaning for our family. And that's what he says. This place was meaningful to me and to my mother. And it's a place of love. And you're now living in this place. And he loved her. It's not just that he found comfort for his loss, but he actually says that he loved her. It's not a phrase that we have, by the way, a lot in the Torah. Vayehava, taking a woman, knowing a woman biblically, those are all phrases that we have. But loving a person, this is actually the first time we've seen that phrase be used towards between a couple. Doesn't mean that Abraham didn't love Sarah. It seems like he loved Sarah very much, but here this phrase is a phrase that captures the emotion of what happens when he still missed his mother. I mean, that's the powerful thing about however long it took between those two stories, for however much time elapsed, he still felt this sense of loss, and that he felt when he was married, now that he was able to find comfort in a way that he didn't have before. Mm-hmm. And it does remind us that, again, for a lot of us, in order for us to move on from our grief, we really do have to open up a new chapter of life. And there is this sense here that that's what happened when he did. And it says Vayinachem Yitzchak, that he's comforted. And that is that comfort that he has is very special, and it goes along with the love that he had for his wife. And those two words are right next to each other in Hebrew. He loved her, and he found comfort. And this is why, again, these two stories almost should always be read together, back to back, like we just did tonight, so that you can see that that love is really the way that we kind of emerge out of grief. There's a lot of ways. It takes time, and there's a whole lot of things that go into dealing with loss. They're very complex, and again, some of them are it takes time. But there's also this sense that what really gets us through the most difficult losses is a sense of love. And that's what helps him. That's what helps him from the point of where he is with his loss. So however he dealt with his father, and however he dealt, his father's still alive, but he felt a loss from his mother, which, you could say this is the first Jewish boy, and he's the first Jewish boy who loses his Yiddish mama. He loses his mother, and it doesn't, and again, it's not up for a boy, but it's for anybody when they've lost their mother, that a piece of them is gone, and there's a feeling like that part of you is gone. And what happens is that love allows us to kind of continue on and to feel that we still have a place, an important thing to do in this world. It's a mother's love is irreplaceable. It's not something that, it's not like she took the mom's place completely, but there was a sense that comforted him and allowed him to do that. It's not a midrash. It's right there in the Torah. It could not be any more clear that that's what happens. Those two things are together. It's not interpretation. It's not, well, the two things are juxtaposed near each other. It's the same phrase. It's the same line. And lest anyone doubt the emotion and the power of the words of Torah, this is one of those lines that sticks out in my mind as one of those lines in the Torah that's eternally true and eternally powerful, which is, again, that love is really the only way for us to come out of loss. Mm-hmm. Which is a perfect segue to remind people that we look forward to getting our grief and loss support group back up as Joyce is feeling better now, and as, again, when we feel that it's safe for people to come back in person. We're really blessed that Joyce has been doing that, and I'm actually looking forward to being able to be part of that loss support group myself, because again, it's been 4 years since I lost my mother, and it's still very powerful, as you can tell. Even for me to think about it today, it's still powerful to still very emotionally powerful for me to think about her loss, and I think about her all the time. So with that, I want everybody to remember to stay healthy and to stay safe. I also do want to give she's not on right now, but I do want to thank Sarah Renson for providing the hospice services that she's done. She's been working up in Washington.
I'll tell her
State.
she's on call tonight, so she got called in.
Yeah, it's
a hard job.
It's a very hard job, and it's a very
Mary's done it for 30 years.
I was just going to say, and Mary did it and lived it for decades. So it's a tremendous mitzvah. And so
Do we have Beth with dignity in California?
I was getting to Mike. I was 100% was thinking about Mary. Just so you know, Mary, I was 100% getting you, and the fact that you did it for decades. So yeah, we're gonna continue our grief group, doing that support on Tuesdays, and we're also, again, very appreciative for people who've participated in the mitzvah of going above and beyond and comforting, and all of us have done it at some point. Reached out and comforted someone in loss and expressed our love, and based again on the Torah, there's really nothing more holy that you can do than to provide love for somebody after they've gone, and to help to do what we can to help people in their grief. So there's a important teaching in Judaism that when we take care of people who've passed, we honor them, and we take care of the people that they love, and we do their work, that they can never repay us for it. There's no expectation that we're going to get anything back from them, right? So when we do something sometimes for people, we're like, well, I'll call it a favor, like you owe me, right? Somebody who's passed from this world can't owe you. They can never repay you. So you're not doing it for any other reason than the highest level of kindness and righteousness. So it's really the highest thing we can do is to take care of people as they're dying, after they pass, and it's something I take very seriously. But
and you provide that love very seriously, thoughtfully, and lovingly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, it's definitely been a big part of the last couple of years. But yeah, and by the way, for anybody who's looking for the payoff for it, there's an interesting teaching, which again, shouldn't have to worry about getting paid off. But the only way you can get paid off for helping those who passed is that's what God pays down. But you don't do it because you're going to get paid off. You do it because it's the way to honor someone without ever expecting anything back. So on a happier note, again, hopefully we'll all find ways to take care of people in their most vulnerable times. So thank you, everybody, for being here today.
And Rabbi Mark, I wanted to tell you my best friend Sherry's granddaughter is in the IDF.
Oh,
she
wow.
was teaching in LA, and she left, and she went to Israel and joined the IDF.
Oh, that's tremendous.
She's been there almost a year.
That's my one life regret is I never got to do that part of if I could have replayed, and I couldn't because I couldn't redo my life, but that's the one thing I always wanted to do was serve in the IDF. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and again, stay safe stay healthy, stay positive in a good way. Don't get positive, stay positive. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.